Welcome to In All Honesty, the podcast where we get real about life and all the problems that come with it. I'm Michelle Elman, and I'm that friend who we all know is a little bit too honest. You might not come to me when you get back together with your ex, but I'll be there for you when it all goes tits up. Welcome back to In All Honesty. So this week I want to talk about something very depressing. I want to talk about loneliness, and it's because I've been feeling very lonely. And you know what? If you follow me on Instagram, you know that I have a very chaotic broadcast channel. And in my broadcast channel, I shared how lonely I was feeling, and I wasn't alone. And I think this is something that isn't spoken about a lot because it comes with a lot of shame. And weirdly, yesterday, I literally wrote in my friendship breakup book, Bad Friend, popular people can feel lonely, cool people feel lonely, but we have this association that lonely people are losers. And ultimately, lonely is a human emotion that everyone experiences. And as someone who is very good alone, like I work alone, I live alone, I've worked and live alone for majority of my 20s, I still feel lonely. And obviously coming out of a breakup and being single again, I think it's also been a drastic change in lifestyle. Because if I think about the beginning of this year, I didn't have a single free weekend for 3 months. And it was an issue that we had been talking about. I was saying I need a weekend to myself. Because if I look back to my single life in my 20s, my weeks are packed. As much as I work alone, I have a very sociable job. I go to a lot of events, and most of the events are in the evenings, which means by the time Friday comes, I am exhausted. And from Friday night to Sunday night, what usually happened in my single life is I would go home, lock the door, and not reappear until Sunday. If anything, I would go to the supermarket once, and I would go to the gym twice. But that was it. I wouldn't see people. And that was how I liked to live my life when I was single previously. It was my way of rejuvenating myself and having enough energy for the Monday. And because my Monday to Friday was so sociable, I was actually really content that way. And then I got into a relationship and we started living together, and I got used to having someone around. I guess because I'm in the adjustment transitional period, it has been hard. And I won't lie, the last 4 weekends, I've had no plans. It was really strange because on Friday, I did a podcast recording for someone else's podcast, and there was a woman who was 80 years old, and it was a podcast all about being single, and I was doing it as the life coach, and I was life coaching the people on the show. And she was talking about how Sundays are the hardest because she had a segment where she was by herself and I was just watching in the background. When I went on set and I sat down next to her, I said, oh, you know, I'm in my 30s and I find Sunday the hardest too. And she was like, what? No, you're in your 30s. You should be living it up. And I was like, no, and I'm not the only one. Many of my friends tell me how lonely they feel and how single they feel. And I'm not even sure the problem is being single. I think the problem is we've actually set up society in a really negative way where we are so reliant on a romantic partner. We don't have much community anymore. We don't know our neighbors. I've lived in the same building for 10 years and I know one of my neighbors. And because we move so much more, and this thing of like growing up in one home and staying in that one place and that one neighborhood for your whole life doesn't really exist anymore, knowing the people in your area is so much harder. And I've actually realized this because of the positive side of it. I basically had a friend who moved in 8 minutes away, and we keep joking we have the best parts of being housemates without actually being housemates. If I'm ever cooking dinner and I have leftovers, I'm like, hey, I've got leftovers for dinner, do you want to come over? I'd go and drop things over when I'm about to leave London in case she wants anything. And sometimes she'll call me on the way home from a date and be like, hey, I'm on the way home from a date, can I drop by yours? And because we don't need to make plans, because it can be spontaneous, because we don't plan things 3 weeks in advance, which if you live in London, you know this is the case, that you're like, hey, should we go for dinner? And they're like, yeah, how does October work? And it's like, well, we're in August. And that kind of thing makes you so distant from the people around you. And then you go to that dinner and all you do is catch up. So if you're having dinners every night, you're just repeating the same stories over and over again without you actually experiencing life together. It's actually something I really write about in my new book, Bad Friend, where I have a whole section on loneliness, because I do think we're setting each other up for failure by living in this way. And we have such a culture of emphasizing individualism, looking out for yourself, always putting yourself first. And yes, maybe I'm guilty of it too, because I have books that have the word selfish in the title. But it means that we actually don't realize by interacting with other humans, there are going to be moments where it's inconvenient. There are times where you are going to have to do something for another person so that they are there for you when you need it as well. And all of this came down to this moment with this 8-year-old where I was like, yeah, I am really lonely. And the worst weekend was probably 2 weekends ago. I won't lie, I've spent most weekends crying because I'm processing a lot. But also, this weekend was really hard as well. And last weekend, I nearly called that friend who lived 8 minutes away. And I didn't, because I was like, it's 9 o'clock at night on a Saturday night. She's going to be busy. Like, it's too late to call someone. And then this week, it was Saturday, it was 7 p.m. And I called her and she was like, oh, I was actually on the way to a date, but he cancelled, but I can come over because I'm like dressed, got makeup on, blah, blah, blah. Came over. And I told her that the previous weekend I wanted to call her too. And she was like, why didn't you? I was like, oh, she'll be out. It's Saturday night. Like, Saturday night, she has loads more friends than me. She'll be busy. All the stories we tell ourselves. And she was like, you know what I was doing on Saturday night? I was in my bed crying because I was so lonely. And I was like, what? So we were 8 minutes away from each other, crying separately because we felt so lonely. And she was like, yeah, I think I was pretty much daydreaming about imagining if there was a guy next to me. And I was like, oh yeah, I've been there too. But we don't talk about this. And but at the moment we said it, I was like, God, how sad is it that we both were feeling lonely 8 minutes away from each other, and all we had to do was just reach out to each other. But then we tell ourselves stories that we're the only one going through this. And I think that's the ironic thing about loneliness. You feel so alone, you feel so ashamed about being alone, so you pull away further, you isolate further. And I think ultimately, if we set up a society where we're so reliant on our romantic partners and being coupled, no wonder people are going through life feeling that. And the most noticeable thing since my breakup is the lack of companionship. But it's even the small things. It's not having someone to tell about the daily like details. And it's not about being single, because if I had a housemate, I'd be able to do that. If I had a colleague, I'd be able to do that. I don't really have colleagues. And sometimes when I'm writing an email, I'm not really sure how to phrase something. And then I get stumped. And what I found myself saying the last few weeks is I just feel like I don't have enough people in my life. Like, I'm not even sure if it's a friendship problem. It's just a people problem. And with having no family in this country, with now not having a partner and not having my partner's family, that was a big part of the people in my life, not having any colleagues and also not having any housemates. It's just an absence of people I'm feeling a lot of the time. Sundays aren't the hardest for me. Saturday nights are really the hardest for me, but it's essentially the weekends. And where I said my previous single life was very much that, I don't know if it was that out of choice, if I was being honest. Because what I found when I was single in my 20s was that the weekends anyway were reserved for your partner. And so the reason why I was going for a lot of weekday evenings is because that's when my friends would slot me in, because the weekends were spent with their boyfriend. And when I had a boyfriend, I did the same thing. As I said, I didn't have a single free weekend the first 3 months of this year. It would be his mum's birthday, his sister's birthday, then it was his birthday, his grandma's birthday. Your diary is just so much busier. Even over the summer, I noticed it, because when you're in a relationship, that's double as many weddings, that's double as many birthdays. And so, yes, that absence is noticeable. I ended up texting my life coach one of the Saturdays, and she was like, just do it hour by hour. And that really helped me, because I won't lie, when you're in that place, when you're in that loneliness place, you don't make the best decisions. And I wanted to reach out to some people who I knew are not good for my health, but it's what loneliness feels like. And I am the first to preach about the difference between alone and lonely. But when you're at the point when I am so good at being alone, it is literally not about the fact that I am uncomfortable being by myself. I love being by myself. Some of my favorite evenings are when I am by myself. But there is a limit on how much aloneness one person can take, because humans are not designed to live alone. We are sociable creatures. We are meant to be around each other. So if you are feeling lonely, it's not a fault of who you are. It doesn't mean anything about your personality. It doesn't mean you're not fun to be around. It could just be a transitional point in your life, and I really hope it is for me. And all I've been able to do, and for the last few weekends I have been doing that, is sink into it, feel that loneliness, and let that feeling pass. It's not really past until Monday morning when I'm back at work and surrounded by people. But I'm doing that thing of living hour by hour, day by day. And I think there's a part of me that realized that it needs to be some proactive changes, that because I am the kind of person who doesn't like to bitch and moan about something and not find a solution, I am actively seeking solutions in that area. So if you're in the headspace as well of feeling very lonely, first of all, you're not alone. And let's get through this together. So the voice note of the week, let's have a listen.
So my question is about loneliness. As you said, that could be a topic that we talk about, but more so about, it's not so much acceptance of loneliness, because I'm there and it's good. As good as complicated emotions can be, but it's more about coming to terms that you might not get something you want out of your life. I'm very lucky that anything I've wanted, I've been able to work really hard and get. I've started a few nonprofits. I've been able to have this career that I'm very excited about, that I'm very, very privileged to have, that I come from a privileged position to have. And I spent the past couple of years sort of, coming to terms with being myself and loving myself, and that's all wonderful. And I think the truth is, at the end of the day, I'd still love to share my life with somebody. And I feel like I have to get totally okay with being alone before that magical person will walk through the door or whatever, right? It's like, it always comes when you least expect it. And you can't love anyone until you love yourself. And I do love myself, but I'd also love to be with somebody. And does that mean I don't love myself, or I'm not okay with being alone? Because the truth is, I'm not okay with being alone. It's hard to not feel like I'm being punished somehow for not having a life to share with anybody, as everything comes up. Is that a question? I think it's a question. Yeah. All right. Thank you. Bye.
I so hear you. I almost feel like our culture has got to the point where we shame anyone for expressing that they want a relationship. Humans are sociable beings. And I totally heard you when you said, I have accepted the loneliness. I know exactly what this felt like, because I was single for 8 years and I remember being the end of it. And in fact, the day I matched with my ex, it was my birthday party, and I actually said to my friends, when is it my fucking turn? And it wasn't the fact that I wasn't okay with being single, and it wasn't the fact that I wasn't okay being alone, but more so that, just like you, I was like, I deserve to be loved. And it's not a reflection of my personality that I've not had this experience. But at this point, I just want that experience. I want to know what that feels like. And now being on the other side of that, I was 100% right. There are experiences I've had in the last 3 years that were new feelings in my body I have never felt. Like feeling in love with someone for the first time was genuinely one of the most positive experiences in my life, no matter how it ended, no matter how I feel now. And I'm so glad I had that, but it also made my life fuller, because as I said, it is not on you that we have designed society to be so reliant on being a couple, and that so many experiences in life now are reserved after that benchmark. But we are told that it's this illusion in our head that, oh, well, if you love yourself more, then someone will appear. And I just don't think that's true. Yes, loving yourself more will always help, but I don't think there is a point where you stop wanting that, because it's intrinsic to all of us. It is part of our evolution to want to, for lack of a better word, mate. Like, it is part of what we are designed as humans. And so I think what is frustrating in our love lives, or being single, or being lonely, even when it comes to friendship, is there is an element that is outside of our control. You sound like a real go-getter who goes after all the goals and ambitions, and the fact you can't strong arm a relationship into your life or more friendships into your life is a frustrating thing. I think the other thing I would say is that your experience is completely valid. I think the other thing I would say is your experience is completely valid. Isn't it curious how the only people who tell you that it will arrive when you least expect it are people who are in a relationship, and that you need to be so okay alone are the people who are in a relationship? And it's hypocritical because, like, I'll be real, there is not a single person who has entered my love life without me expecting it. Like, 90% of people who have come into my love life are because I've gone on a dating app. They've not magically landed at the bus stop. They've not picked up something I've dropped at the supermarket. Like, this idea of meet cutes that will happen when you don't have that desire almost shames us to want to remove that desire. And if that desire is what you feel, then I want to validate that and say, it's okay to feel that way. And also, it's absolute nonsense to say it will happen when you least expect it. It's also nonsense to say that you can't find romantic love until you reach this epitome of self-love, as if there's this idea of fully healed or fully in love with oneself where you don't need any other humans in your life. It does not exist. But also, when I was in a romantic relationship, it taught me self-love. It taught me so much about myself more than self-love. But there are things that I've always believed this. There are things that you cannot learn until you are in a relationship. You can learn all the lessons you need to learn when you are single, and still you will learn more when you get into a romantic relationship. And that day on my birthday party, when I was like, when is it my fucking turn? Like, that was genuinely the feeling I had. I was like, I have learned all I have needed to learn around being single. I am good being alone. I can spend endless amounts of my time with myself. I have gone through 3 lockdowns and a pandemic completely alone, living by myself. I am good alone. I am probably too good alone. And I did end up being too good alone when I ended up moving with someone and had to unlearn a lot of that. And I was feeling the exact same thing as you. And whilst I don't have a lot of solutions around it, I do think it's important to say that, because when we tell people that, like, you need to get to this point where you don't need other people, it's this illusion around individualism that doesn't actually exist. And it's okay to want other people in your life. And I'm sorry it's not happening in the timing that you want. And that's probably the thing that you can work on, is letting go around what timing it should be. I think we have a lot of messages in society about it happening by certain ages. Wanting that, craving that, desiring that in your life is a very normal human feeling. So how are we going to address this loneliness we're all experiencing? I think the first lesson in all of that was, I realized this weekend that when you're feeling lonely, reach out. It does make you want to isolate. It makes you want to hide away, and actually sending out texts to people, whether it's to your friends and saying, hey, I miss you, would love to put a plan in the diary, and actually just being more proactive around making plans. Because after last weekend and me having a very similar weekend the weekend before, I was like, I need to do something about this. And I was like, let's actually make plans for the weekend. And I'd kind of got to the point where I had assumed everyone was just busy every weekend, so I actually stopped bothering asking. I actually reached out, sent a ton of texts on Monday morning to all of the people I know, being like, hey, I miss you, would love to see you. And then the other part of it is reaching out to people you don't know. So for me, I largely do it via my DMs on Instagram. I will go, if there's someone who I'm acquaintances with, maybe we DM once in a while, I'll be like, hey, do you actually want to go for coffee? Or if I've caught myself in a conversation over DMs, I'll actually do that. But the other thing that happened on Saturday night was me and my friend together went on Bumble BFF. We downloaded it and we created profiles together, and we decided that we're both going to go on Bumble BFF dates, and that we might even turn them into double dates. And whoever she meets on the app or whoever I meet on the app, we could be like, hey, can I bring a friend along? And Bumble BFF was very interesting because I couldn't understand the idea that, like, the profiles are largely a visual thing, right? There are so many pictures, but I don't decide who my friends are based on aesthetics or what they look like. But what was actually interesting and what changed my mind around it is the caption. The caption is very different to dating apps. I won't lie, there are a lot of men on there who are saying they're looking for friends, who are not looking for friends, and somehow using this friendship app as a dating app, or they've clearly put the wrong setting, because obviously Bumble is also a dating app. But in terms of the women, it's largely people explaining why they're looking for friends. A lot of people have moved to a new place. a lot of people actually say, oh, it's that phase in your 30s of people are getting married and having kids, and I'm finding there aren't many friends who are single. I saw that on so many profiles, which, considering I was having one of those lonely weekends with my friend who was also having a lonely weekend, and we're both in our 30s and we're both single and we're both experiencing losing half of our friendship group to marriage and kids, and also moving away, because when people get married and have kids, a lot of people are moving out of London. It was really reassuring that there is this thing about being in your 30s and almost a friendship group or all your friends dividing in half, and people go one way, get married and have kids, and then there are the single girls left behind. Not left behind, that's a really negative way of putting it, but maybe that's more a perception of how I feel right now. And swiping on there was also another avenue you can make friends. I have not gone on a Bumble friendship date yet. It is something I actually planned to do about 6 months ago for my friendship book, and I never got round to it. So it is likely going to be an experience that will be too late for my friendship book, which is very annoying for both me and my editor. But I am determined to go on friendship dates. Yes, they are more effort. Yes, talking to a stranger and all the small talk that might come with it, and potentially being a mismatch and then having a little bit of an awkward afternoon is the downside of it, just like the downside of using dating apps. But I think it's that thing of, I just have a part of me that hates bitching and moaning about something and not doing something about it. So that's one of the active ways I am working against it. I now have plans for this weekend. I actually have plans to go swimming on both Saturday and Sunday with different friends, because I started making an effort. And then I also promised that friend who lives 8 minutes away that when we feel lonely, we'll at least text each other. Even if the other is busy, we will reach out, because making the assumption someone is busy is just a way you add to your pain when you're not even sure it's true. The other thing that I started thinking about is, I think a large part of my loneliness is actually touch deprivation. I used to be that friend that was so affectionate. I was so affectionate with one friend that her boyfriend didn't ask her out for 9 months because he thought she was dating me. That's how affectionate I am with my friends. We were actually in Parliament that day. Me and my friend were both doing this job, and then we met this guy. And because me and my friend were holding hands the entire day, he thought we were together. And that's how I always was when I was single. And then when I got into a relationship, I guess I unconsciously was a bit more boundaried in terms of my affection, especially when it comes to my guy friends, out of respect. And since I've been single again, I've not been that affectionate since. Having someone who you wake up to, share a bed with, you're hugging every day, and with my ex in particular, we were really affectionate, always hugging, and then not having that in your day-to-day life, there's a very real touch deprivation thing that I believe is going on in our society. I very much felt it in the pandemic. I mean, there's science behind it. There is science to show that if you get hugged more, you have higher oxytocin. You also have higher stress, and I think you have lower blood pressure, but don't trust me on that statistic. Hugging and touch is needed for good mental health. And unfortunately, when you're single, because especially in British culture, we're not very affectionate people. I think that's another thing that happens. And that also leads to the loneliness, because also there's a calming effect of a hug. If someone is having a panic attack, hugging them and actually having that pressure on your body, it's why people love weighted blankets. But I genuinely think the only reason weighted blankets are popular is because we are so deprived of hugs. And that was another thing that I was thinking about, where I was like, okay, maybe I'm going to make an active effort to be more affectionate with my friends again. Because I remember when I was single, I once went for a massage, and right at the end of the massage therapist turned to me and went, I just have this overwhelming feeling when I saw you that you just really need to be hugged. And it was right after the pandemic. I was like, because I really did. And I do think there are just all of these lifestyle changes that happen when you're single again. But if you're going through a transitional period, or you've actually been in a loneliness period for a while, maybe you've moved somewhere new, or maybe you are also going through that thing said on all those friendship profiles, saying that all your friends are moving on, all your friends are going to a different life stage and you're not joining them. There really needs to be an avenue to make new friends. And obviously this is a topic I'm talking a lot about at the moment, and talking about friendship breakups clearly is not putting me in the best headspace. And having written about friendship breakups for the last 8 months and be so deep in that conversation, I'm handing in my book next week, and I'm so looking forward to not talking about friendship breakups anymore, because it is a problem that more people are facing than we will ever know, because it is so shrouded in shame, and unfortunately shame leads to silence. So even if this podcast episode was just telling you you aren't alone, and talk to someone about it, tell someone that you feel lonely. Like me and that friend saying to each other, God, I felt so lonely lately, was just a weight off our chest. Ultimately, the societal issues and how we have a lack of community, I hope people are going to start realizing that's a problem, because it's also in very concrete ways that we can't change, like the lack of community spaces that exist, free spaces where you can hang out in public and get to know your neighborhood, are things that were commonplace years ago. And so when we make this loneliness problem, this loneliness epidemic that researchers actually talk about to be an individual problem, and we personalize it, it's another way you are adding to your pain when you don't need to be, because it doesn't mean you are a loser or a bad person or have a bad personality simply because you don't have enough people around you right now. So as you know, we end every episode talking about something I'm learning right now. And I am learning, since we're undoing the shame around things, I am actually unlearning my need for attention. Attention is such a dirty word, but considering I do this career, you will be unsurprised that I like attention. It is very high in my values. I have realized that that has actually led to me making a few bad decisions in my life. And so I'm actually learning to sit in the discomfort of not having attention. Now, when attention is very high in someone's values, it's largely because they didn't have attention when they were younger. I went to boarding school, I was in hospitals, all kind of things. So rather than judging attention as this like dirty word of attention seeker, attention whore, all of these things, it's actually about understanding why you need those things to be able to unlearn it. So how I am unlearning it is I am looking at the decisions I am making and asking myself why I want to make that decision. And in doing that, I'm hoping I am becoming conscious of the moments I am making decisions out of attention and trying to choose otherwise. And that's all you can do. Be self-aware about it. You can't change it unless you know when you're doing it. And hopefully as a result, attention should drop lower in my values, because I have recognized it as not being a particularly useful thing in my life anymore. Obviously, there are elements I can't change. My career will always give me a huge amount of attention, more than the average person, because it's not normal to have 500,000 people you're talking to every day. And across Instagram, TikTok, and now my podcast, I get a lot of attention, but that's where it ends. And also let it not seep into my personal life. Yeah, so that's a work in progress. I will let you know if I have reached the final point of being able to exist with less attention. But if you're the kind of person who has been called attention seeking, know that also it's coming from a very understandable place rather than us judging the surface level of things. I think sometimes we need to look underneath as to why someone is the way they are. I would love to know what you're learning at the moment. Wherever you're watching this, leave us a comment if you're watching this on YouTube and Spotify, or you can leave us a review. And if you'd like to leave us a voice note, you can leave it at inallhonesty@mindsetforlife.co.uk, and I'd love to answer one of your questions on the next episode of the podcast. I will speak to you next Tuesday.